Welcome to Taking the High Road, a special show dedicated to the trucking industry, specifically at the confluence of recruiting, retention, and compliance. In the fourth year as the host of this show, I bring over 2 decades of industry experience, both on the carrier side as well as the vendor side. Each week, I interview industry experts and thought leaders who bring their insight to the driver lifecycle as we discuss the industry's greatest challenges. I always appreciate your feedback, good or bad. Don't forget to leave a rating and a review. I'd also like to thank and highlight the show's valuable sponsors. Their dedication and commitment to the industry and to the show is greatly appreciated. If you're interested in being a sponsor of the show or joining me for an interview, please email Jeremy at takingthehigherroad.com. Now, this week, I'm honored to be joined by a special guest, someone who's leading the company that I founded, which is near and dear to my heart, DriverReach's CEO, Brent Dorfman. So great to finally have you on the show, Brent.
Thanks, Jeremy. I'm glad to be here.
Well, since this is your first time on the show, I figured we can, get into your background a little, what attracted you to this opportunity to lead the team at DriverReach and what you're seeing in the market since you took the helm just over a year ago. And perhaps you could share some of what you believe separates DriverReach from its competitors and what philosophy the company has embraced and really in order to, continue to grow and excel in helping companies better recruit, qualify, hire, and retain drivers. And then lastly, we'll answer a question from a listener during our deeper dive segment. Does that work for you?
Great.
All right. It's a lot to tackle, but I think
do I have to remember all that, or are you going to tell me again?
We'll go through it systematically here, or try to anyway. But as you probably know, I generally start most conversations with a book recommendation. So if is there a particular book maybe that you can share with the audience that's been particularly impactful to you?
So I read books that I'm too embarrassed to talk about here, but I listen to podcasts. So I recently listened to the Microsoft episode of the Acquire podcast, which I don't know if you've listened to that one. It's really cool. They do the history of certain companies, and it spoke to my heart because Microsoft was literally the creators of software, something you and I know a little bit about. But what was so cool about it was the founders, Bill Gates and others, had this forever attitude that they knew computing power was coming. And they wanted to be ready for when it got there. And they were planning for it years before it was ready. And it was just really cool hearing the story of the founding and the growth of Microsoft, especially given that we're in that business now.
Yeah. And I love podcasts too. Certainly you might have said this one, but I know you regularly listen to Taking the Higher Road, but doesn't probably have quite the same profound guests on it that, hearing the story of Microsoft's founding. But yeah, those types of podcasts are always fun. Certainly.
Not yet, but let's see where we are in 10 years.
Sure. Now, you've been the CEO of DriverReach for, as I shared, just over a year now. I'm sure many in the industry are really just kind of barely getting to know you. And so I figured it might be good to start with you and your background. So who is Brent Dorfman and how did you find your way into the trucking industry?
Yeah, I am not yet an industry celebrity, so I'll have to work on that. Maybe more of these can help me. I actually started out as an M&A attorney, as a mergers and acquisitions attorney. So for a few years, I worked in a big law firm doing that, which was not really for me. But after a few years of law, I found my niche in supply chain. So I've been in supply chain ever since, and I've seen all sides of it. So I've worked. I ran U.S. operations for a large retailer on the shipper side. I've worked at a couple different 3PLs. Through all this, I was obviously working with lots of trucking companies, buying from them, using them. But it wasn't until DriverReach that I've gotten my real first experience in the trucking industry. So it's been quite fun. It's an amazing industry, and one that I've really gotten to know over the last year.
Yeah, I would say in that short amount of time, and it certainly hasn't taken you a year, early on in us working together, I think you really embraced it. And to me, I've always say this on this show and anybody I talk to about trucking, once you get into it, and especially if you really go all in, not only is it hard to get out because you don't want to, but you realize how special it is. And also you can build relationships that last a lifetime. But you didn't know that, when you first started. Can you share maybe what it was that attracted you to the opportunity at DriverReach and maybe what excites you most about leading the team?
Yeah. Well, there's like the boring part of that answer and the not boring. So the boring part, it was a really well capitalized company that's backed by some really, really smart private investors. And I know you brought them in, so you know this, Jeremy. But that was something that mattered a lot to me. I wanted to go to a company that could invest in the vision that I was going to have. And so that, as boring as it sounds, was a really key factor. The more important stuff is, as I got to know you and as I got to know DriverReach, it became clear to me that this was a major problem that we were solving, and that DriverReach was the one that had solved it best. It's pretty unusual to come into a company that is not the dominant force in the industry, but it has the best solution. And I got really excited about the possibility of taking that. Because as you and I talked about them, that challenge of telling the world how great it is much easier to tackle than the building the product, which you had already done. So I think that was really it, just knowing that we had the backers to take us where we wanted to go, and knowing that we had the product to differentiate ourselves.
Well, that may be a good, opportunity, because as trucking is a highly regulated industry. And I often say that recruiting and compliance go hand in hand. You can't recruit truck drivers without compliance being a foundational component. And just maybe for those in the audience who don't know what DriverReach is all about, that means I haven't done a very good job of articulating that or sharing that. But can you share at a high level what problems you're solving for the industry, what problems DriverReach is solving, and maybe explain how DriverReach is doing that?
Yeah. So I came from outside the industry, so some of this I still have a fresh perspective on. But in the 3PL world, when I wanted to hire warehouse workers, we just hired them. It wasn't complicated. We had to train them, but we put out ads. We got people to come in, and they started work the next day. Very simple world. The world of hiring good quality compliant drivers is not that easy. And anybody in the space knows it. So I'm telling them things they already know, but due to the regulatory environment that we work in, there's just numerous steps that we have to take to bring on drivers. And then once they're on, to keep them compliant. And it is such a headache that a company of any size can't really manage it without good tools. And so what DriverReach has built is they've built a suite of tools that they don't make it easy, because there's no making this easy, but they make it manageable, and they make it manageable quickly. And so whatever size fleet it is, we provide tools to let you find, hire, and ultimately retain good quality, safe drivers. Now, there's a lot more to it than that, obviously, but we can get into some of that, or that's it at the high level.
Yeah, well, and I, trucking in general has been deficient. I mean, it's been behind other more innovative and progressive industries. And certainly I felt like, as the founder of DriverReach, bringing a more modern, solution, being more modern technology to the industry, because it's so deficient. And, frankly, when I founded DriverReach, there was really just one option out there. If a company wanted to embrace technology with driver recruiting at all, and it was a monopoly. And, as a former customer of that company, I was certainly dissatisfied and was determined, and really kind of determined to provide a better solution, for the industry. And so, and my goal with that statement is certainly not to sling mud at a competitor, but it's more about just the desire I had to help build or help companies, take their driver recruiting to another level. And there's kind of a status quo out there, right? Just doing things the same way they've always been done. And I know you've seen that since you've been here. How do you feel, DriverReach is, positioned to combat that status quo?
Yeah, the status quo, it's interesting. I hate to say that it's trucking specific, because I don't think it is, but I think it's gotten into the psychology of trucking, of fleets, in a way that people just throw their hands up. And I just hear it over and over again, like there's not enough drivers, or drivers aren't safe enough, or it costs too much to bring them in. And it's really fatalistic. And it's interesting, because the great fleets don't say these things. They don't have these problems. You'll never hear them talk about driver shortages at some of our, great successful customers. And but this status quo, this idea that there are these problems, it's like it lets you take it away from yourself. It's something I can't solve, so it's not my fault that it exists. And it's a really powerful mechanism. Let me maybe tell you a story, because I actually had a customer of ours ask me something that exemplifies this. So we were training a new customer that was coming from a different ATS, and they asked us, they said one of their problems is that their current drivers will often apply for jobs to them, so working for a fleet, inadvertently apply for a job at that fleet. And they wanted to know within our platform how they can siphon those off to HR to let HR know that they're looking for a job. And so they have this ridiculous problem, which is that current drivers are so prone to just applying to jobs that they're not even looking at the companies they're applying to. And they inadvertently apply to their own company for a new job. And they asked me how DriverReach fixes this. And I was like, we don't. Like that's a ridiculous problem. We fix it by not having your drivers do that. And there's, they're doing that because the other companies they had worked with made it so easy to apply that this was happening all the time. And we're like, that's not how our system works at all. Like the types of drivers you're going to identify, you're going to talk to them on the human level. They're going to know who they work for. This isn't going to happen anymore. But yeah, go ahead.
That's a silly problem. You're right. It's just something I've never even heard somebody say something like that before. But I mean, the good news, I suppose, is that if you do see that kind of, they're at least doing what they should, which is, hey, like maybe there's a problem here with this particular driver. But yeah, that's just a problem that you shouldn't have. As you said, enabling them to deal with, more on the human level is, at the end of the day, trucking is a people business. And, I say all the time, you can have the best technology at your fingertips, but, that's not going to hire or retain CDL drivers. It's really all about the people. And maybe you can share, or if you can speak to how DriverReach supports, building and managing relationships through the platform. How can they solve for the problem that you just talked about?
Yeah, I mean, you said it great. And, I'm always upfront with this when I talk to customers or prospects. We're not giving you a silver bullet. There's no miracles here. Like you still have to have teams that want to work and want to work hard and want to find solutions. And the software tools that we can give you will make their lives much easier. But if they're looking for an easy way out, they're in the wrong industry. There's no easy job in trucking recruiting or trucking compliance. And so, what you're asking about is this human element, this communicating. I mean, that's it. Like when we're talking about the recruiting side of the business, they have to actually recruit. And so it sounds ridiculous to say that, but if you're not willing to actually sell your company, sell your brand and talk to people, then you're not recruiting. You're just taking in leads and processing them. And so the tools that DriverReach has, we're a communication tool product first. Like all of the things that we have, it gives you ways to talk to drivers, talk to potential drivers, on the platforms that they're in. And so we encourage heavily to use texting, for example, because drivers have mobile phones. It's their preferred method of talking. We're not going to make them download an app. We just think you should text with them. And when you have a message to get out to them, send it to them on a text, and they're probably going to see it. And it's interesting because like texting is so simple. It seems so ridiculous that we have to remind them about this, but it's the best way. And we have another customer up in Chicago, and she told this story, so I'm stealing it from her. But she said that they needed to hire 15 or 20 drivers for a very specific niche thing. And she was saying the easy thing to do would have been to go to her CFO and say, I need a marketing budget for this, right? You need me to hire 15 new drivers. I need $2,000 per driver or whatever. Give me my 30 grand and I'll go spend it. But instead, she went into DriverReach. She selected a whole bunch of leads that fit the right criteria, and she ran a texting campaign, and she filled the trucks without spending a penny.
And those are her leads, right? Those are leads that she had.
Yeah, they were leads that she already had in the system. She'd had them for who knows how long. Maybe she had disqualified them a year ago, but they were not disqualified now. Whatever it was, she didn't sit there and go, I have this problem, I'm just going to throw money at a marketing firm to solve it. She looked at it and she said, I've got this asset, all these driver leads. I'm just going to go recruit them myself. Those are the stories I love to hear. Like that's money that she saved at a time when her company no doubt needed to save that money.
Well, it's the right thing to do. They spent the money on the front end, right? Attracting those drivers in the first place. I say this kind of stuff all the time, and you nailed it by saying that the DriverReach is a communication first tool, because that's what it empowers them to be able to do, is engage with the applicants that they've accumulated over time. And they can do that in a whole number of different ways. And that's a great example, because they don't have to spend additional advertising dollars to talk to the people that they've already, have attracted in the first place. Um, and you made a point earlier about recruiting and sales, and I can't overstress that enough. How recruiting and sales, there's such a parallel. And so some of that CRM functionality that I know, DriverReach that's foundational is salespeople use those tools all the time. Recruiting is no different. You're engaging with prospective instead of a customer, right? A prospective driver, and you're leveraging those tools to communicate and engage with them to help facilitate that process as efficiently as possible.
Yeah, and recruiting is sales, so you have to sell, right? Sell your brand, sell the job, right. Sell the culture of the company you work for. Like we have enough customers that we see great culture and we see less great culture. And the companies with great culture, they're not complaining about finding good drivers. They're just not. Like they're able to attract them and they're able to sell their brand.
And most of them, I mean, we've had this conversation with them for probably the last year and a half or more. Most of them have a waiting list at this point, and it's a good and bad problem to be in. It's good because of their brand. It's bad because that's also indicative of the challenging times that we're in, that we'll probably touch on here in a minute. But I know that you're a data guy. Like that was one of the things that we talked about early on, and even before you came on board. You're very analytical, and you use data to make good, informed decisions. Is there any data that you can speak to that might reflect improvements in the hiring and or retention process for customers of DriverReach, maybe either before and after, or maybe against others in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, this is an area that we are as proud as anything, is that we support fleets that are perform really high on important KPIs. So, a couple jump out. Turnover rate, so the percentage of drivers that are turning over, it's significantly lower than industry benchmarks for DriverReach fleets. And I think there's two things going on there. I think one, it's the communication tools. That again, if you are sold on a brand and you really are excited about coming to work there, you're not going to ghost them in onboarding. You're much stickier. And so I think that's a big part of it. And two, because of some of the data we're able to give fleets, they can see where good drivers are coming from, and they can change their lead sources to make sure they're bringing in these stickier long-term drivers. So that's a big one. Turnover, like obviously that's one of the biggest problems in the industry. So I'm excited that that's something that our customers outperform in. The other big ones, it's all around marketing costs. So cost per lead and cost per hire. A huge pain point in the industry. This is money that, it doesn't always need to be spent. And it's so hard to know where your money is going when you're trying to recruit drivers. And so we've built some really amazing tools and reports that let fleets see what money is being spent where and what's being the most effective. And you can break it down as much as you want. You can look at cost per lead or cost per hire or cost per completed app, whatever metric, and they consistently outperform what they saw before coming to DriverReach or what you would see in industry benchmarks. So again, it's super important when a fleet comes on, their financial health is going to improve because we can give them this data and show them how to save money.
Yeah, that's super impactful. And I'm sure, hopefully, those in the audience who heard that, hopefully that's resonating, and it's something, if they haven't taken a look, at least I think it makes a lot of sense to. And I know DriverReach recently had its first regional user conference in Chicago. I was there, you were there. We had a number of folks from the DriverReach team there, and customers and non-customers, or some prospects and partners. How was that event, and were there any takeaways worth mentioning?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I didn't really know what to expect, and once it got going, we kind of just let our customers take over. And it was really the customers that shined. And that's the point. Like, one of our customers, which is a 650 truck fleet, started talking about how they literally have no marketing budget because of all these things we've already talked about here, but they're able to attract such good drivers through their own sources. Others shared stories about the ways that they're finding success right now. And it was just really cool because I talked about this a little bit earlier, but these are fleets that are not sitting there complaining. They're not stuck in the status quo. Again, I don't think the words driver shortage were mentioned once. Everybody there sees problems and looks for solutions, doesn't look for blame. It was just really cool listening to our customers talk about that. So for me, the big learning is we need to do it again. So I know we're planning to do one this fall in a different region and try and bring back even more customers. But it was really exciting. I mean, I learned a lot, not just about our product, but about the industry and about what successful fleets are doing. I'm sure you did as well.
For sure. And it was, I certainly, pride, definitely something super proud of personally, but then also you build relationships with some of these folks. You hear these great stories and you get to know them on a personal level. And I think that's so impactful. And kind of to your point, I think what I certainly came away with was, yeah, we got to do more of these because they're fun. I mean, even if you just did them just to hear these great stories and, it was a lot of fun. So let's shift gears and talk about the economy. Since the day you took over as CEO of DriverReach, we've been in the midst of an awful freight recession. It's sort of like welcome, and this is what you get handed. What are you hearing when you talk to customers or prospects out there, and how have companies maybe embraced technology like DriverReach during these challenging times?
Yeah, so I don't think that I have like good news on this front. I'm certainly not talking to a bunch of carriers that are telling me that contract rates and spot rates are surging when times are great. So I have not heard anything to make me think that things have improved enough to matter. What I feel fairly confident is that fleets now know the world that they're working in. They're not expecting it to change quickly, and so everybody's kind of come to terms with where we are, and they've adjusted their businesses to reflect it. But yeah, I think back to what it was a little over a year ago when you told me about the freight economy, and I was like, okay, whatever, that doesn't matter. I was wrong. But what I remember thinking then also was, even if it's bad for a company like us, we should still be able to succeed. And so I think I'm proud of the whole DriverReach team that we have still done fairly well in a very challenging time. But it's tough out there. It's tough across the board. And I know our customers are feeling that pain as much as anyone. I'm assuming you're still hearing the same sort of thing when you talk to fleets.
Yeah, and I have this conversation all the time on this show, and I'll talk to people about, and a lot of times I'll ask what's worse, what they're experiencing today versus maybe what they experienced during the Great Recession, 07 through 09 or so. And it was mixed early on, and I'm getting certainly more and more of a bias towards it being much more difficult in this environment. And I don't know if that's from a recency bias. They don't remember what it was like 15, 12 years ago, however long ago that was. Or if generally this is just way worse. There certainly doesn't seem to be a light at the end of the tunnel yet. But kind of to your point, the companies that are doing things right, nothing fundamentally has changed, right? That we still, we're still consumers of goods, although probably more services than goods, it seems, recently, and that you can't put those on trucks. And then we've got a surplus of trucks, right? There's certainly, you need to kind of unwind that to some degree. That I think a lot of that was hangover from COVID. And that's just how things work. The pendulum swings, far one way, and this is what happens. But the good news is, and I think kind of to your point, companies that can leverage technology, operate more efficiently, they're going to, they're really prepared, hunker down and just get prepared for, think it's a very cyclical industry.
Make decisions. This is something that I talk about all the time, that very rarely as a CEO are you presented with multiple good options to choose from, right? You're usually presented with bad options. And so I get it. The economy is tough. There's no magic button you can press to make this 2020 again. But the fleets that are doing well, they're being bold. They're acknowledging where we are and they're taking steps. And sometimes that means spending money, as crazy as that sounds. But, if you have a dying, aging fleet that's leading to the huge out of service and drivers that won't drive in your trucks, it's not going to get better by letting that fester another year. So I think that's another thing I've noticed from fleets that are doing well is they're the ones that are just, they're being bolder, and they're not sad about the situation anymore. They're taking ownership of it and trying to succeed through it.
Yeah, and one of the things I'll say before we get into the deeper dive segment, one of the things I'll say too that I'm hearing a lot more of, and I have been really for at least a year or so, is companies leveraging, and I know some of our customers, but certainly companies leveraging technology of any sort around recruiting is, there was a time where driver shortage was what we were talking about all the time. You had, companies, it was a challenge, and therefore you wanted to preserve every driver you had, even if they were not your safest or best performing drivers. They were, maybe costing, business even from, important customers. But today, the one silver lining in this current economic climate is that there is that option to sort of upgrade or top grade from your, maybe if you have bottom 5-10% performing, drivers in your fleet, you can be a little bit more aggressive on the recruiting side and replace some of those underperforming drivers. That's not a luxury that this industry has known to have for as long, especially because the demand for drivers, generally speaking, is always surpassed, supply. And so from that perspective, I do think that's one additional consideration that companies should leverage.
Right?
Yeah,
it doesn't hurt
for
at
sure.
least.
So let's get into the deeper dive segment. Today's deeper dive question is brought to you by National Transportation Institute. And the deeper dive question is, how do I convince my boss that investing in technology will pay off in more ways than one? Who best to answer that question than the CEO of DriverReach? What are your thoughts?
It's so obvious, it's almost silly when you really look at the math on something like this. The ROI on bringing in technology it's so positive. And so, a platform like ours is a drop in the bucket on the bottom line of a fleet. And if we can seat you one more driver a month, if we can cut your cost per lead by 20%, if we can cut your cost per hire by 10%, this thing pays for itself in a month. And so, I don't think there's any question, and that's just on the very easy to measure stuff. As you look even further, like, what is it worth to you to know that your DQ files are always compliant? I can't put a number on that, but I know it matters. And so I don't think it's very difficult. Again, software, the beauty of software is how scalable it is. It's not super expensive. It's not super hard to implement. If you're trying to show your boss an ROI on it, it's really easy to do. And you should be able to show value on it in less than a month. So I hope that answers the question. If anybody wants to ask that one to me specifically, let me know, and I'm happy to help craft the ROI.
Well, and maybe to that end, what's the best way for listeners here to find you and inquire about the possibility of partnering with DriverReach?
Yeah, the best way is our website, so driverreach.com. There's plenty of places there that you can reach out to us, and we'll give you a call.
And you're more visible on LinkedIn as well. So if you're not connected with Brent, I certainly would encourage you to do so. Again, he's newer to the trucking side of the industry, but has embraced it with completely. So Brent, thank you so much for joining me. I wish you much success, obviously, as the CEO. I'm a big believer in the work that DriverReach is doing for the industry.
Thanks, Jeremy. It was fun.
And thank you for taking the higher road with me. Once again, special thanks to the sponsors of this show, including DriverReach. We really appreciate you. If you're interested in being a sponsor or joining me for an interview, please email Jeremy at takingthehigherroad.com. Until next time, thank you for taking the higher road.